I'm Dr. Dan Hale, co-director of the Congregational Depression Awareness Program here at Johns Hopkins. And today I have the privilege of having with me Reverend William Johnson, one of our distinguished chaplains, and also a longtime pastor here in Baltimore. So welcome, Dr. Johnson, and thank you for being here today and for going through our Congregational Depression Awareness Program.
Thank you, Dr. Hale, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share, and for the great work that you're doing with our congregations around the topic of mental health.
Well, good. Well, I'd like to start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
Sure. I'm in my 39th year of ministry, though I look so much younger. I'm in my 33rd year of pastoral ministry with the congregation that I'm currently serving in the city of Baltimore. Proud graduate of the Howard University School of Divinity and undergrad degree from the University of Virginia. Completed my training in healthcare chaplaincy with Johns Hopkins Medicine's academic division. Going into my third year now as the community chaplain for the Johns Hopkins Health System. And happened also to be the son of a former pastor and chaplain. He was also director of pastoral care. And 5 members of my immediate family are in pastoral or chaplaincy ministries. And so we have a ministering family. My wife and I have 2 married children and 5 beautiful grandchildren.
Wow, that is quite a legacy, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, I recall in an earlier conversation you and I had around depression that you mentioned early in your career. You had a view quite different from the view you have right now of depression and other mental health conditions. So can we start by telling us what your view was maybe those 30 some odd years ago?
Yes, certainly. I was reminded of my early views of mental health conditions, and especially depression, when I went back one day and listened to a sermon that I delivered while still in seminary. And in that sermon, I heard myself say, in essence, to the congregation that some of them were experiencing depression and other mental illnesses because they were not walking as closely with Christ as they should. And I also implied that they didn't really need medication or therapists. They only needed Jesus. I may not have said it exactly that way, but that was the implication.
So I gather that view has changed over the years. Can you tell us sort of how it has evolved and how you view depression in particular these days?
Yes, it has changed over the years, and I'm grateful to God that it has changed over the years, because as I contemplated that, I recognized that it was really a misguided message, and I realized that I had really spoken more out of my own ignorance regarding mental illnesses than out of any real zeal for Christ. And also realized that my theology concerning God's compassion, God's desire for our wellness and our wholeness. And when I say wholeness, I mean mind, body, and spirit. And also God's gifts, those gifts being physicians and healers and counselors and therapists and even appropriate medications, that theology was at best, I would say, underdeveloped. And so there has been some changes in that and growth.
Okay. So what are the practical implications of your current view of depression?
So I would say that my own spiritual growth, as well as my personal experiences with some family members who have dealt with mental illnesses, has taught me that not all illness is a result, is not a result of individual sin, and that mental illness is as much a part of the human condition as is illness in the body. In fact, mental illness can often be considered a physical illness when we consider physical changes that may be occurring in the brain, either as a result of or as a cause of or cause for various mental illnesses. And I found that depression is probably one of the most misunderstood of mental illnesses in the faith community. I think that in the faith community, we've often mistaken depression for weakness, sinfulness, laziness, faithlessness, or worse, demon possession. And yet close examination, I think, of Judeo-Christian scriptures reveals that many spiritually powerful servants of God may have also experienced varying levels of depression, from mild and short-term to more severe and longer lasting. And so it is really kind of a part of life. And so when you talk about the practical implications for this, I believe that the practical implications for clergy and lay leaders is that we must recognize and acknowledge that there may be many people in our collective congregations who are suffering in silence and who are perhaps crying out for help and being made to feel marginalized and stigmatized, and therefore who are afraid to really boldly ask for the help that they need. And I believe that their suffering reverberates, if you will, or reverberates, if you will, rather throughout the community, because their families, their loved ones, co-workers, their fellow parishioners are all affected either knowingly or unknowingly by the silent suffering, of those who are dealing with mental health issues. And it is unnecessarily sustained suffering because I believe God has provided the resources and the tools to bring about effective healing. And so I don't, think that this means that we in any way set aside our faith. We don't set aside our rituals or our theological beliefs. I believe wholeheartedly in the power and benefits of prayer. But there's some persons who are under mental duress may benefit solely from having prayer partners and pastoral counseling and meditation as therapy. But there are others who may have more severe illness, and they may need a greater level of intervention, if you will. And so to me, no matter what the level of illness or duress, no one should be made to feel as though their mental illness is evidence that they are less faithful, that they are somehow super sinful, that they are less spiritual as compared to others.
You mentioned the tools that God has given us. Would you include both antidepressant medications and psychotherapies?
I would. I absolutely would. I believe, again, that it is based on the level of illness and that there are those persons who would benefit from that. Yes.
Well, I find this very helpful. Let me just close by, do you have any additional comments, guidance for clergy and other lay leaders or members of congregations or the general public? What sort of advice can you give?
Yeah, my advice would be to talk openly to your congregations about mental illness. And I think that once you start that conversation, you may be surprised by the number of people already seeing therapists and by the number of people who open up confiding that they are struggling, but they were afraid to bring it up. I found that recently in a conversation I had online with members of my congregation, and several persons talked about either themselves or members of their family who are struggling, who I had no idea were struggling with some mental health issues. And they were happy that they were relieved, I should say, that they had this opportunity now to talk about it and not feel stigmatized. I would encourage them to check in with each other, your members to check in with each other. And if someone seems a little out of sort, or if they themselves feel a little out of sort, reach out and get the assistance that you need. And the last thing I would say is to have readily available emergency phone numbers and other resource information. Don't feel like you have to be a mental health expert, because we're not. That's not our calling. But there are persons that we can, refer persons to who need that help. And then finally, I'm going to say this, and is listen. And I think that's the biggest point. Listen with compassion, listen with concern, recognize the pain, and then journey with that parishioner as far as you can, and then hand them off when you need to. If a person falls in your church and breaks a leg, you're not going to set that leg. You're going to get some help for them. Same thing with mental illness.
Thank you. This has been very helpful.
Thank you.